So I've opted for the mic that lets me move around a little bit just because I felt bad yesterday when some people can see with the pillar and some people can't. So I'm going to experiment with whether that lets me move around a little bit and you can see a little bit more. I'd like to start just by finding out a little bit about who's here in the room. So if you could put up your hand if you are a lawyer. Great. And put your hand down. Put up your hand if you are a legislative drafter or work in policy. Yeah? If you are a professional writer or editor. Great. Can you put up your hand if you are a UX or developer? A couple, yeah, great. If you are a trainer. Wonderful. Can you put up your hand if you are a user of plain language resources? Great. What if you are, is there anyone here who is a funder of a government or not? At least one? Is there anyone who hasn't put their hand up yet? And is there anyone, can you put your hand up if you put your hand up more than once? If you are more than one of those things. Wonderful. Thank you. So as you heard, I am a lawyer. Can we get the PowerPoint up? I don't know how to do that. There we go. So I'm a lawyer, as you heard, and going to law school changed language for me. It changed what words meant, and I'm sure that's true for many of you as well. And at the end of the first year of law school, a group of my friends and I went on a camping trip that we called Unlearning Law School. We were looking to change or to at least grieve the loss of some of the language and the outlook that we had beforehand. And I'll tell you, it's no surprise, I'm sure, to you, some of the words that were ruined for me. I never again have looked forward to a tort. I used to really like chocolate. Now, all of a sudden, I just cringe at the thought of a tort. What am I pointing at? Consideration used to be something that I thought was going to help me, and now the thought of a handful of peppercorns is about the worst kind of consideration I can imagine. This morning, I want to take a look at how we can reverse some of the culture change that comes through the language we use. I don't know that's going to help me with my cake issue, but in some other contexts in which we use language and it influences the culture around conflict. I've got a definition here of plain language. I'm not advocating for this among the many definitions. I'm just using it in an illustrative way, in that I think plain language offers the potential to focus on people and their understanding of legal, health, financial, business, medical issues that they face. But if we look at this definition, and most of the definitions, the emphasis is on the reader. The reader understands as quickly as possible. And I think implicit in that is a writer. And the writer is the one who has the knowledge and decides which knowledge people should get in this document and in what order and how much of it. There's already a relationship of controlling what information is coming from the writer to the reader. Of course, we need to do this, but I think that that's a relationship we should think about. And we should maybe be a bit more critical and reflect on what happens when we are choosing who gets to know what and when. What if instead of just trying to make legal information and options easy to understand, we were actually trying to give back some of that fundamental control over the conflict? If we were trying to find ways for people to feel at the center of their conflicts, we can think, I think, about plain language as more than the ability to understand the options and the legal choices, and have it also be to think about how we use plain language to shape society's understanding of conflict and reaction to conflict. So I'll tell you where I won't tell you that. I'll tell you something else first. We know that language can change society. We've actually been hearing over the course of the last couple of days the Maori greetings and acknowledgements. In Canada, we do a similar acknowledgement to the Indigenous First Nation on the land that any public event is happening. And in the last couple of years, Toronto public schools have started every day with an announcement. Before they announce the bake sale and the sports team, they start with an announcement that the students and the school are on the traditional lands of the Haudenosaunee and the Wendat people. Every student in the school, when it's their turn to do the announcements, says that. And so that's an interesting use of language in the way that language can convey respect. Now, in the last couple of weeks, some of you may realize, probably not, but Toronto's baseball team was in the playoffs. And thank you, some of you did recognize. So the Toronto Blue Jays were playing Cleveland, and Cleveland has a very racist name that's very offensive to say in Canada. And there was a big debate in Toronto about that. People refused to say the name. Broadcasters refused to say it. Sports reports refused to say it. The Toronto Blue Jays were just playing Cleveland. No one ever said the rest of the name. I'm not going to say it. If you want to look it up, you can. But also, there was a campaign started by grade 9 students to get the stadium to read that acknowledgement on US national TV. Grade 9 students started that campaign. An architect tried to bring a human rights complaint to restrict the way language was used. And in those couple of weeks that Toronto was in that series, in my casual conversations with my friends, no one said the name. So the idea that that language that's being slowly introduced as part of Canada's reconciliation with its Indigenous peoples conveys respect also is changing the culture. And it's changing the culture where this little moment made it really easy to see how different that culture is from our neighbors to the south who aren't having that conversation about language, or at least other conversations, but not that particular one. On maybe a slightly more humorous side, I think the term ladies is being reclaimed in a different way by women. It was once used to be quite dismissive, and its inference was fairly negative and patronizing. And now we see people using it to reassert women in typically male-dominated roles. Both the Society of Beer Drinking Ladies and Ladies Learning Code are just two of the examples that are quite common in Toronto. So we know that language is powerful and can change society, and I think it's time for us to take a look at deliberately doing that within the culture around conflict. So I am going to tell you now a story about how I got to this. This is my dad up in the top corner. He's standing beside a sign, a blurry sign that says McCoubrey Farms. My dad is an orchardist. He grows apples and pears. And about 6 or 7 years ago, he decided to sell the farm and to a couple who were looking to get into organic growing. It's very expensive. They had a very complicated sale agreement over 10 years with a vendor take-back mortgage. And so they wrote up their agreement on a single piece of paper and then sent it to me and said, "What do you think?" And I said, "Yeah, that sounds like what you've been talking about, but you need to take it to a lawyer." And my dad said, "No. I make a deal with someone I can trust. I do it over a handshake. I'm asking you, because it seems polite to ask you, because you know about these things." But he was not interested in going to see a lawyer about a massive transaction. And so I sat there on the phone and made up the worst case scenarios that could happen. You and Mom are both in a train accident, and then we have to pay estate taxes, and then my brother has to declare bankruptcy, and so we have to foreclose on them, like ridiculous scenarios, to demonstrate that things could go wrong, not because people were bad people, not because he had trusted the wrong person in his handshake deal, but just because things could go wrong, and it'd be important to find out about that. So he relented, and part of why he relented is that a man named Richard is a lawyer in the town he lives in and had recently bought an orchard. So all of a sudden, this was a vote in Richard's favor, in my dad's eyes. And so I wrote up a list of questions, and my dad, and sent them to him, saying, ask about this, get all your documents, photocopy them in advance, put them in order, be ready to leave them. That was the extent of my advice. And he went and he met with Richard. And he called me afterwards, and he said, that was amazing. It was only 20 minutes. It didn't take very much time. He just asked a few questions. I understand what he was saying. And not only that, he didn't charge me, which I thought was strange. Like, what do you mean he didn't charge you? Richard asked my dad if he could trade that legal advice for my dad coming out and teaching him how to prune his apple trees, right? So Richard treated my dad as a professional, and they had skills of equal value that were worth trading, where both people are learning something new. And that was really critical to that transaction. I also got an email from Richard saying, I wish all my clients came in like that. That was so easy. Thank you for helping prepare that little bit. And so I sat there after that experience thinking, it's not the lawyers that are resisting this. It's not hard. But my dad has 2 degrees. My mom's a university professor. They can afford a lawyer, and their daughter is a lawyer. And yet he was too embarrassed, too ashamed. He saw going to a lawyer as a sense of having made a bad decision or not being able to manage his own affairs in a way that he felt was the way he would do business. And so I started really thinking, where does that come from? Where does that shame come from? When did we learn that it's okay to ask a doctor embarrassing questions about how your body works, but it's not okay to ask for help on legal issues? I think that we have a real separation in society between us as good, kind people and the conflicts that cause us anxiety. And looking at how we make that connection, I think, is one that language has a huge role to play. That's it for learning about my random rural background, I hope. So where do we get these perceptions from? I think TV is a big culprit, not surprisingly. TV about legal issues tend to focus on crime, on people in poverty, maybe on refugee issues. They focus on people who are very vulnerable, quite desperate, and sometimes have made bad decisions. So that bad decision part of being involved in a criminal activity, for instance, reinforces this message that legal issues are because you did something wrong and that you should be in some way embarrassed or ashamed of that. I often talk to classes of young people, and I will make the point that law is involved in every aspect of their life, and I will challenge them to come up with anything that does not have a legal issue. And they will rattle off all of the usual things: their family, their housing, their employment, their access to school. We'll talk about cell phone contracts and bylaws that affect the roads and building codes that keep the buildings from falling down. We'll also talk about personal issues: identity, religion, how their freedom of conscience, how their thoughts are protected in our society. I have yet to have anybody come up with an area of their life that does not have a legal dimension. And yet, we somehow are ashamed of asking for help. How did we become so disassociated with conflict in our life? I live in Toronto, which you heard already. It's a big city. It's the most multicultural city in the world. And so that means that, of course, there are people around me with different ideas about how to live. We make our living in different ways. We have different kinds of families. Sometimes we make decisions independently or collectively. We have different faiths, different politics. But I think even more interestingly, we might disagree on how late to go to bed, how much we should pay for something, how loud we should be, how fast we should drive, where our dogs should get to walk, how much taxes we should pay, what our services are worth, how neat our yards are, what we should be allowed to print on our t-shirts, what kind of books we read, how we make our food. If you stop to think about, and if I'm really honest about my life, if you think about that list, there are potentially more points of conflict than there are of connection with all the people that I share the subway or the sidewalk or the workplace with. I think my overarching point is that conflict is predictable. It will happen. You will have conflict with people. And that is not the way we talk about conflict in society. We talk about it, hopefully you don't have it, here are strategies to avoid it occasionally, but most of the time people talk about it with that shame or that embarrassment, rather than starting with that presumption that, of course, it's every day, it's common. The question is what we're going to do about it. I think our common narrative around conflict tends to have two emphases. Our social, not our lawyer common narrative, but our social common narrative has two themes. One is that if you make good decisions and have good judgment, you won't have conflicts. And secondly, if you're good enough and smart enough, you'll be able to resolve them. Conflict resolution, especially the way it's taught outside of the legal context, say in a bullying context in schools, really privileges the people who are able to express their own interests, to manage their own emotions, and to come up with a solution. It leaves the person who didn't manage their conflict, or who was in a conflict and didn't get to say what they needed to say, doesn't like the result, often feeling like a failure. But if you imagine the 50-year-old Muslim girl with her Catholic friend, should they really be able to manage or resolve the conflicts that their religion creates? Of course not. But shouldn't they still be able to play soccer together, or football, depending on where you are, or work on a class project, or imagine their futures together? That maybe resolving conflict doesn't need to be the social goal that we hold up all the time. Maybe we should also be talking about how to accept that there will be conflict in your life, how to normalize conflict, how to cultivate a comfort with some conflict. It's okay that we disagree on this. We're going to move forward and connect on something else. Accepting that conflict is normal would also mean that we stop judging people for not being able to resolve their conflict or not having conflict in their lives. And whether we're actively judging or people are assuming they're being judged, we do see the impact of that. So changing the language to create this comfort around conflict would mean going further than having people understand the legal issues that they're in, to having them feel safe and confident and secure. So if we turn to the language we use, what happens when we apply that legal lens? If we talk about who the people are in a conflict, we use terms like plaintiff, respondent, applicant. If we talk, how do we describe the problem? An application, a statement of claim, and the results. And this is the worst one of them in my books: remedies, incarceration, disposition, cost awards. Most of those words are nowhere else in society. Most of those words describe processes, the way the process is going to work. If we contrast that with how people generally talk about conflicts, they talk about a handshake deal, they talk about looking someone in the eye, they talk about people-centered metaphors, people-centered descriptions. And what we have in front of us here are paper-centered terminologies. Finding a way to reconnect people to the center of their conflicts is about language, as much as, or at least a starting point is about language. When someone has a legal issue and they hire a lawyer, they often describe their problem and they sort of hand it over to the lawyer. And then the lawyer shepherds their problem, their conflict, through a mysterious path that results in an unknown bill to a remedy that the lawyer might be quite proud of. And we don't actually always know whether that in any way met the needs of the person. They might not even understand what that is. Even the language that lawyers use to talk about it. I won a case. It, right in that language, talks about owning someone else's conflict. It was mine and I won it. That's a very different way than the way people might describe what they're actually looking for and what those conflicts are like in their lives. If we look at our plain language, our clarity context, I think there's a real emphasis on people understanding legislation, forms, self-help, steps to navigate once they're in a legal issue, which is a great starting point, don't get me wrong. But I think we could apply our plain language expertise to help make that further recentering of people back into the middle of their own conflict with options about things that they could do themselves. We could change the language to help them understand their role, how they might have anticipated and avoided the same issue the next time it comes up, how they might accept that it's okay. Maybe it's fine that you and your neighbor don't get along. Maybe nothing needs to be resolved if it's not escalating. Or maybe it would shift the way they talk to each other. Maybe my dad would actually talk with someone about what happens when it goes wrong, rather than keeping that as a point of fear. So if we look at what this might look like, I think we can learn quite a lot from other sectors. In the health sector, there's been a real transformation of the role of the lawyer, of the doctor and the patient into what is often called patient-centered care. And you can see here on this illustration, there's a suite of services that wrap around that patient. That has happened because people know how to Google things. They walk in with a list of their symptoms and they've already figured out and self-diagnosed and are asking for a particular prescription, or have maybe, to bad effect, overreacted to what they think they now have. So doctors know that people are coming in with different information than they get from their doctor. They've had to change the relationship. It is no longer a relationship where the doctor has all of the authority. It is now a relationship, and increasingly so as we get more service providers involved, of trust. And that trust is premised on two-way communication. The patient has to be giving the doctor enough information, has to understand what the doctor says and go and do it, and keep coming back and forth in order for it to work. That's a trust-based use of language that is different than the authority-based role that doctors used to have, and that I would say law often has. We can also look at this in the financial sector. You're getting a screenshot of my savings account. In the financial sector, I think that the shift has actually happened because of a service-driven model. This is how I find out what's happening with my money. On my phone, whenever I want to, in language that I understand. We invested your money. You paid a fee. Those are sentences I would use to describe what's happening. They happen in very simple ways. I can look at it and understand how much money came when. It's simple. If I don't understand what's going on, I have a starting point to go and ask them questions. I feel like this is the level of conversation that should be happening, and if I have another question, it better be that clear when I call them and ask them questions. So we're in an environment where for what happens in our bodies and what happens with our money, we expect to be able to understand the issues and manage the conversation in the direction. And for law, we don't have that yet. In the legal aid context in Ontario, we often talk about mail avoidance, M-A-I-L, avoidance. And mail avoidance is when people, just before, when they finally have no choice but to be in front of a tribunal or talk to a lawyer, bring in a box of unopened mail. They have been hearing about their consumer issue or their bankruptcy or their tenancy issue from the appropriate places, maybe in wonderfully written, clear, plain language, for months, but they didn't open the mail. So somewhere between I can understand my own finances or I know how to Google my symptoms and I don't even open the mail, we have a confidence problem in the relationship that language could recenter. It's a great start that the documents inside those envelopes are written in plain language, but it's not quite enough. So how do we do that? We need to start sharing control of conflict. I've been talking a little bit about this, but it's the client's problem. And the client makes the decision, and the client lives with the results. It isn't the lawyers. It isn't the systems, it isn't the courts, it isn't owned by the insurance company, the corporate environment on the other side that has in-house counsel. It's a person's conflict. All of them are people conflicts. It's easy for us to spend a lot of time in documents and lose track of that. We also need to recognize that we don't own the law. This is not always a popular sentence when I say it. Judges don't own the law, legislative drafters don't own the law, lawyers don't own the law. The law is the way we organize society. We are all equally invested in that. We are not privileged as the writers and the interpreters in owning the law, and we need to stop behaving like we are. We are a tool. That tool should be put to the use of the people who live within that society and use that law. That's a bit of a mindset shift. So, looking at how we do that, preventative lawyering, for those of you in the room who put up your hands when you're lawyers, I think is an interesting part of it. How do we take a client-centered approach? How do I stop talking where my advice is the most important thing that's happening in the conversation, or my expertise? It's not that I understand it better than anyone else. In fact, the client understands their own life probably better than anyone. How do I share what I know about the timing, about the expense, and about the process? We often talk about the result. Here's the legal concept, here's your rights, here's what you can get out of this. We don't often say to someone, going through a divorce is going to take somewhere between 8 and 14 court appearances, and it's going to take 24 months. If someone hears that, they might make a different decision on whether or not they want to proceed with that process. That's hopefully changing quickly in Ontario. Those are awful numbers. How do we talk about what's actually going to happen that isn't your legal expertise? It's just your process expertise. I've just done this before and I know what it might be like. Give you more information to make those decisions. I think we need to talk about the kinds of results that matter to people in terms that matter to them. And one of the ways to do that is just to be upfront about letting the person in the conflict describe what they hope will come out of it. And then you can decide, is that even possible in a legal context? Once we make something a legal problem, take the whole messy human problem and make it legal, then there's only legal results that are available. And that may not be the thing that makes people the safest, the happiest, the most settled. That doesn't mean we should encourage people not to follow or pursue their rights, but maybe they don't do it first. Maybe first they take care of an issue they're having with co-parenting. Maybe they go and talk to a financial advisor first. Maybe they wait until they get through a medical treatment that's giving them some anxiety and they come back in 2 months and do it. But once it's mine as a lawyer, all of a sudden the legal timeframes, the legal options, the legal remedies drive that person's experience of their conflict. And that's only one little bit of their conflict. There's a project in Ontario that's across Canada that the Canadian Bar Association is doing with legal health checks, and I know some other jurisdictions do that as well. I picture it, preventative lawyering, as every time you talk to a lawyer about anything, an existing legal issue, they also ask you, by the way, is your will up to date? I notice your kids have gone off to university. Maybe you no longer need your will to dictate their guardian. Maybe it's time for a new set of provisions. It's the same as when my doctor asks me as I leave the office, are you sleeping okay? Are you getting enough exercise? It's a general preventative mindset that shifts the lawyer into being a long-term trusted professional, not a reactive crisis-based professional. Now, my contrarian side really likes telling a bunch of clear language writers to make it complex instead of simple. But it's not the language that needs to be complex. I think we need to recognize that people's lives are complex. That the issue that we are working with them on is in the midst of the health and the social and the family interactions that are happening. It affects their job, it affects their well-being, it affects whether they can afford to go on vacation, it affects all of those other things that are the messiness of human lives. And once we turn something into a cold, analytical, legal problem, we have reduced that messiness. So let's make sure we're doing that in the right way, in a way that helps people. This is a screenshot of a civil resolution tribunal that's happening in British Columbia to deal with strata condo disputes between condo owners. And you can see in there, well, this will actually produce forms and start an action. It also has little suggestions like keep copies of your documents and record that you sent them. You can go to other parts of this process where it says, how are you feeling about this? If you're feeling stressed, do you want me to refer you to somebody who could help? So the site itself, which is trying to automate the dispute, is also trying to push people to a mediator, to some medical supports, to suggest ways that they might be able to minimize the harm on their employment relationship or change the hours. How do we make our services complex in those ways? And next, I think we need to listen. I think lawyers would do well, and legislators and people who are thinking this way would do well to listen to how people talk about the law. Not to their problems particularly, although we should listen to those too. These are two projects, one in Nova Scotia and one in Ontario, that just listen to people and let people describe their perceptions of the justice system in their own words, and these are not people who are in conflicts. So with the TAG project, we went to festivals and exhibitions and music festivals and street parties and asked people, why would you maybe not take action on a legal issue? Who would you talk to if you wanted to, and how could we make the system work better for you? People were just delighted to be asked. One woman hugged me and said it was the most important thing anyone had ever asked her opinion on. They weren't facing legal issues, they weren't in a conflict. And out of that survey, 52% of people identified too intimidated as the reason why they wouldn't take action on a legal issue. Of course, cost was in there. Not sure if it would result, a bunch of other things, but 52% said they were too intimidated. When I share that number with lawyers, really good lawyers who write well, who speak well with people, who think they're doing a good job, they are shocked to find out there are that many people not even getting to the door. So somewhere we still have a social perception problem. And then my last point is we need to start talking about progress, not perfection. I think we're a profession that fears being overturned. We aim for certainty, we value precision, and that stops us from engaging with people as we're trying things. It stops us from really being a part of a culture change, which happens slowly and takes three or four steps forward and then hopefully only one back and then keeps going. Those are not perfection models. And I think if we really want to build trust, we need to be talking about the fact that we know there's a problem and here are the things we're doing. We're not just going to show you the end result, we're actually going to engage people in how we're going along the way. This is a recently launched site about Canada's Justice Development Goals that addresses in plain language specific goals that people could understand and start to see progress on and monitor their connection to it. So imagine if people simply understood and accepted that conflict would occur in their lives, that sometimes they'll manage it themselves, that sometimes they'll need help, and sometimes they'll need expert help, lawyer help. Imagine if they knew how to spot the difference between those, if they knew when to ask for that help, when to ask when it was still cheap, when to ask when it didn't cause them to lose days of work or put stress on their relationship or miss a mortgage payment. What if they knew where to go when they did that? Language offers that revolutionary potential to change the culture. And so I think not only could we as a community be working for better understanding of legal issues when people are in it, we could be choosing the mindset that has us deliberately change the culture to one where people are at the center of their conflicts, where we use that mindset to rethink what we as writers are holding back and what we're giving people and when. And are we doing that because that's what's going to transform the way people understand their conflicts? Or are we doing that because that's what we've always done? I don't pretend it's easy. I don't pretend to know every time you use which word when and how you make that change. But that shift alone is something that would have us think differently about what it is we're trying to do, what kind of society could happen as a result of a shift in language, much like the examples we started with are shifting culture in ways that maybe no one would have thought possible. So I leave you with that challenge to think about that mindset shift and think about the work we do in those very big, hopefully inspiring ways about how we could make this system really work better for people. Thank you.